He was Jimmy Doolittle, boxing champ, motorcycle racer, a sort of chill-em-and-thrill-em stunt flyer, a veteran of World War I. It happened just about 13 years ago. The Japanese were attacking. Disasters were piling up for the Allies in the Pacific. American morale was pretty low.
Pearl Harbor disaster was a disaster, tremendous defeat for American air power and naval power in the Pacific. They had taken Guam. They were advancing on the Philippines. They had pushed the troops to Bataan, and then the Bataan was taken, and that left this small corps of people on Corregidor. It was nothing but bad news.
Then someone had an idea. In those days, before intercontinental bombers, why not bomb Tokyo with B-25s from a carrier? The mission was approved.
Doolittle first had to work out how the B-25 could achieve what had never been done before. And second, had to find 79 men to do it with him.
I was sort of a romantic. I'd read books of Richard Halpern, swimming the Hellespont, wading in the pool at the Agra in India. And to me, the raid was a grand adventure.
And we all knew the name as a speed flyer, you know. But we were regular Air Force troops, you know. We weren't particularly impressed with him. But anyway, Ski said it looked like a good deal. It involves action against an enemy capital that has never been bombed. And that was the first time we'd met the old man. He came in, we were all there, and he flew in. And it took all of, 30 seconds. And you're sold. Mm-hmm. Yep, he is. Well, he was just, you were just his from then on, from that moment on.
You men are here because you volunteered. You have been told it's a dangerous mission. I can't tell you any more than that now, but I want to emphasize the danger. The most important thing at the moment is secrecy. I don't want you to even tell your wives what you see down here. And if you think you've guessed where you're going, you're probably wrong, but don't even talk about your guess. If the slightest word about this mission gets around, you will endanger not only your own lives, but the lives of thousands of other men. You're going to do things with a B-25 you thought were impossible. Now, if any of you have any doubts, I'd like you to drop out right now. And I promise you that no one will ever think the worse of you. If you have wives or children or any other considerations that might get on your nerves in a crisis, it's perfectly all right. As a matter of fact, it's your duty to drop out.
He said some of you are going to get killed. And he said, when he asked that question, how many of you are going to be willing to go? I thought, not me. He started in at the other end of the line, and I was clear down at the end. He asked every one of them, and all of them, maybe there's 25 or so, they said, I'll go. So I didn't want to be the only coward there. I said, I'll go. That's how I got in on it.
On the President's order, the bitter taste of war was returned to Japan. We fashioned a daring scheme to have the Hornet launch a force of bombers and strike at Tokyo from the sea. All the volunteers for this secret and hazardous job had been specially trained by Colonel Jimmy Doolittle. Lashed to the flight deck, the 16 B-25s had a rough voyage. Hoping to reach a takeoff point 450 miles from Japan, but ready to start in event of discovery, the crews kept fit.
Someone's asked Colonel Doolittle what they should do if they are hit over the target and they have to bail out, or if they are damaged. And he said, I know what I would do. And somebody said, well, what is that? And he said, I'm going to bail my crew out, and I'm going to take this airplane and dive it into the best military target I can find. He said, I've lived a full life. The rest of you, the pilot of the airplane is in command. He will make the decision.
Everything was going smooth, too smooth. And then the unexpected happened. Bad luck. 800 miles from Japan, we sighted a Jap patrol boat. A radio might give us away, so... That sunken Jap might have used a radio. And aboard the Hornet there was feverish conference. The secret might be out, and Doolittle had planned too long to fail now. Japan had to be bombed. 800 miles now to go. Double the planned distance. More than double the danger. Small chance now of reaching China. But Doolittle did not hesitate.
In spite of the last-second change,
The old man had two options: either go or they push the airplanes overboard to free the deck for the Navy fighters. The old man said, "We go." Well, and the fact he didn't say it to the group, he just cranked up his airplane, took off.
Doolittle's plane let off. Up. And away.
crewmen cheered as one plane after another screamed down the swaying runway.
There were 2 near casualties. One chap took off on the upbeat, and his airplane, that is, while the carrier was pitching and while the bow was rising, his airplane was thrown up in the air, and he barely regained control before going into the water. Another chap put his flaps down, and when he put the flap control back in neutral, he inadvertently put it all the way up. So he took off without flaps.
I looked at that deck and I said, my God, I can't believe it. 400 feet. I was used to a quarter of a mile takeoff in a B-25 loaded. And I looked at York and I said, how many of these did you do? And he said, I never did one.
80 men and 16 airplanes streaked toward Japan, not 450 miles away as they had planned, but because they had been discovered 800 miles away. They flew on the deck towards the west.
We're airborne, off we go. And about an hour and a half later, Corporal Maskey called on the intercom and said, "Sir, we don't have enough gas." And I said, "That's right." Click, end of story.
The strategy was to bomb and fire military targets only. No schools, hospitals, the Imperial Palace.
I made the order that no one will bomb the Imperial Palace because I felt it would do little damage and it would sew the Japanese nation together better than any other thing that could happen.
Apparently, there was no advanced warning of the raid, as we experienced little hostile action. We approached the targets right on the treetops, pulled up to about 1,500 feet, and dropped our bomb. 1,500 feet was the lowest altitude from which we could bomb without danger of damaging our own ships. We should like to have remained around to see exactly what had happened. This was impossible, as we were in a hurry.
As the raiders left Tokyo with a broad trail of flame and smoke in their wake, Japan tasted war.
Emperor Hirohito, who ruled the Japanese by divine right, had guaranteed his people that Japan would never be attacked. But with a single daring strike, a handful of Americans made a mockery of his sacred pledge. Their mission accomplished, the Tokyo raiders headed for the China coast, looking for safety, their fuel impossibly low.
We're just going along, I don't know, a few hours there, and the navigator says, hey, things are looking good. What happened, we picked up a tailwind of 35 to 40 knots that lasted for about 6 hours.
Which you would have never made it without it.
Yeah, that's right. And the weather probability, we'd stuttered with the weather for history for, years and years back. And this was an unexpected help. So pretty soon he said, gee whiz, we're not going to swim but 100 miles, and then pretty soon 50 miles, and hey, we can make land.
But I looked at the altimeter and I said 3,000 foot high, and the pilot, Bill Farrell said, we're out of gas, we're going to have to jump. I said, are we in free China or occupied China? He said, I don't know.
Japan had gained control of much of the Chinese coast. As the planes flew over the dark, inhospitable terrain, they searched for the radio beacon that was supposed to have led them to a safe landing field.
They had completely impregnated the coast, so it was in far enough. What happened was the airplane flying our landing beacon, which we badly needed to home on, and other fuel for us and so forth, unfortunately crashed. All aboard were killed. And so when we began to plaintively call, turn on the beacon, there was no beacon.
So people went their separate ways?
We just went to where we got as close to as we could to where we thought we wanted to go.
As the planes ran out of fuel, each pilot ordered his crew to strap on their parachutes. For most, it was their first jump.
I was the first to go out. So you have nothing to compare your descent with. And I just felt like I was, going like this. And here I am, soaking wet, about 120 pounds than many that time. And I felt that I wasn't falling. And I had an awful time. I thought maybe I could do something with the cords, no collapses thing. And of course this all happened within a matter of seconds, and pretty soon, whammo, I'd go right in the side of the mountain. And I had baby roofs in my jacket here, 12 of them. And when I got on the ground, I had just the wrappers. The candy had chucked right out of the jacket. But I was scared to death. That was as frightening a time for me.
It was for me too, believe me.
We didn't really know where we were because we'd been in the soup for several hours, and there are no lights in China at that time of life, and we didn't know where the Japs were. We had a general idea, so we were in a strange land at a strange time, and with some strange people.
Now, I started walking west, and then I met people. And they had told us on the ship, if you smile at a Jap, he may not smile back. If you smile at a Chinaman, he always will smile. So we grinned an awful lot.
A man appeared in front of us with a weapon. So we assumed he was a Chinese guerrilla. But as we started to go by him, Mac was first. I was the pilot. I was the co-pilot. I was second, and the other members of the crew behind me. As we got abreast of him, I was looking at that weapon, and he had it ready like this. And I jumped him. And I guess it was foolish, but it really wasn't, because the weapon was held together with rice straw. It was tied up. And I opened the breech, and there wasn't any bullet in it. He had guts, but he didn't have a weapon.
The Chinese quickly learned that these men who had mysteriously appeared in their fields one night had just bombed their enemy's capital. In their gratitude, people all over China risked their lives to hide the American flyers and escort them to safety. The lucky ones were brought together in a mountain cave.
One crew went to Russia. The gas consumption was excessive on their airplane, on both carburetors, both engines. So they had to make a difficult choice of either going there, which was the closest landmass, or ditching 300 miles or more out in the sea, shark-infested, enemy-dominated, high waves, winds. They couldn't survive, so they had to make that difficult command choice.
One plane, against orders, went to Vladivostok. And they were kept until the war was almost over, and then were permitted to escape. And the humorous thing about this was that the Secretary of the Treasury, I believe it was Morgenthau, was it not? Mm-hmm. He called me in once a month, very regularly, and just gave me a terrible going over. He had just received another bill from the Russians for the food and lodging of the 5 people that they were taking care of for us.
How many boys did not return from that mission? How many died on the mission? There
were 2 people drowned when we landed. 4 were executed by the Japanese. 1 jumped and was killed when he jumped. His parachute was available. We don't know what happened. So there were 7.
8 of the raiders who crashed in Japanese-held territory were captured. They were all convicted of murder, and 3 were immediately executed by firing squad. That angered America.
Americans mark these men well. General Tojo and his murderous crew, executioners of the captured American flyers. This nation will see that they pay for their crime.
That picture came out on Time magazine. My mother and my folks, my brother was there, and they were talking about it. They saw that picture, and my mother said, that looks like Jake. I wonder if it really is. And my brother said, that's him, and he's mad. And they'd taken us out in the front and taken our blindfolds off. And I don't think we even had leg cuffs on anymore, or handcuffs. And we were right out there. I don't know if we did. Maybe we had leg cuffs on.
After they made that picture on the courthouse steps the next morning, then, when they moved us that time, they put the blindfold on us, leg cuffs and handcuffs, and moved us to the next town. You know, we spent the night at another town that night.
Yeah.
And this is where they interrogated some of our people.
This is where they started getting rough.
Yeah.
This is where they started getting
They
rough.
stole my watch, and the lice were crawling all over us then, too.
In the weeks following the raid, Doolittle searched for his missing men, thinking a military operation might liberate them. He even sent word to the Japanese that he would pay ransom for those still alive. He wasn't successful.
At first, I was lower than a frog's posterior. I sat on the debris of my aeroplane. We hadn't gotten to where we wanted to go. We knew that there had been some casualties. I felt that we had done some damage, but it seemed to me that it was sort of a sorry situation. That hadn't been very well done for some reason or other. A commander thinks first of his people. He, of course, thinks of what damage was accomplished, but his first thought is for his people. And I was pretty worried about what had happened to my people.
They were talking, he lost all his airplanes, he didn't know where all of his crews were. He says, my God, he says, I've ruined everything. He didn't know what success we had or the impact. He says, I get back and I'll probably go to jail. I don't know what's going to happen. And Paul says, Colonel, he says, don't you worry. He says, everything went well. And he says, when you get back, he says, you're going to get the Medal of Honor and they're going to promote you to general.
He was called by General Arnold and was told to be ready to go to the White House. Well, there was silence as driver was driving them away. And Jimmy said, where are we going? And General Arnold said, we're going to the White House, Jim. And he said, well, I don't like surprises. I don't want to, I'm not a very smart fellow and I'm liable to make some mistakes. Tell me what we're going to do there. And he said, we're going to give you the medal. The president's going to give you the Medal of Honor.
For that first devastating aerial bombardment of Japan, Brigadier General James H. Doolittle receiving from President Roosevelt the Congressional Medal of Honor.
Jim was surprised and he said, but General Arnold, I don't deserve the Medal of Honor.
Americans know him best as just plain Jimmy Doolittle.
Well, after he got it from the president in the White House, he then said, thank you, Mr. President. I'll spend the rest of my life trying to earn it.
I thought I'd done that.
Would you now accept the suggestion that the Medal of Honor was not necessarily only for you, but for your whole outfit? And
that was my thesis. I said every one of those chaps took exactly the same risk that I did. I didn't feel that I was entitled to the Medal of Honor any more than they, and if I did get the Medal of Honor, it was for all of us.